Okay, g'day guys, it's CZ here. Today we have Jeff from Goodieson Brewery on the phone with us to have a bit of a chat. But first and foremost, I guess I just want to say thank you, Jeff, for doing this phone interview. To start with, Jeff, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself, your brewery, maybe your passion for brewing, and some of your experience in the craft.
Thanks, CZ. Thanks for having us. So my wife and I own a microbrewery down in McLaren Vale, so we've been up and running for 7 years now. Previous to that, I was a brewer with Lion Nathan for basically 12 years. And previous to that, did malting and brewing at university for 4 years. So the passion came pretty much through uni, and just loving the science and the process, the analytical, the reproducibility, the repeatability of brewing, and the joy of drinking it, of course, in moderation.
Of course, yeah. Responsibility is the key. So you've got your own craft brewery or microbrewery, whatever you want to call it now. How long have you actually been in your own business?
We've been up and running just over 7 years now. So we bought this property back in 2007, so we own about 3.5 acres down in McLaren Vale, overlooking the vines and the Willunga escarpment there.
Yep.
And set about the process of going through council to get approval to build a brewery, which was very interesting back then because council had never done a brewery before. So we're the first brewery in this area in 147 odd years.
Wow.
So we had to sort of lay some groundwork for council to do, but we've been up and running. We've got, what do we got? We've got a lovely sort of 1,200 hectolitre German-built brew house, all steam-fired, which allows us to produce beautiful pilsners, and my box in particular, because it's a very gentle boil, phenomenally gentle. Most of our production, about 40% of our production, is just sold within 5 kilometres of the brewery on Sand Road here. And the rest goes in Adelaide into independent bottle shops and restaurants.
Wow. Well, I have had the amazing privilege of actually having a few of your beers. I think the first time I went to your brewery was probably 2 years ago on my birthday. I went down there myself. Unfortunately, you weren't there yourself, Jeff. I think it was one of your counterparts. But I had a tasting there, which was absolutely fantastic. And obviously just recently, a little bit before my birthday, I went down there with my brother and got to experience, again, some of your amazing beers. Why don't you let us know about maybe some of the awards that you guys have taken out over the years, just so the viewers can have a bit of an understanding as to what you guys have actually produced. Yeah,
so over the last 4 years, I think, we've won Best Small Brewery in the state twice. So we're actually the only brewery to ever do that. So that's pretty good for us. We've the wheat beer, which is probably our special. Well, I don't like using the word specialty because all our beers I think are special.
Yeah.
But that has won Best Wheat Beer 3 times. The brown ales won Best Porter twice, and the stouts won Best Stout once. So we've got 6 trophies. Well, if you count small breweries, probably about 8 or 9 trophies we've won.
Wow.
In the last sort of 6 or so years. So we do produce quality product, but then again, I've had a lot of training, so.
Yeah. Well, I guess that's where I next want to get to. And this was, obviously I want to give you some free publicity and let the guys know that you're out there. Even the international, I've got a fair few international subscribers. And if they ever want to come down to SA, obviously, to South Australia, obviously, I'm sure they'd like to head down there and, give you guys a check out. But one of the things which interested me most, obviously, when I was down there recently, was I got into a little bit of a brief discussion with you just about, the science of yeast and just how, obviously, it's, without the yeast, we wouldn't have our beer. So you've got to respect it. Knowing a little bit about it is always beneficial, even if you're just a backyard, amateur craft home brewer like myself and like a lot of my mates are. I've been really getting into yeast and just trying to discover a little bit more about it. Now, you obviously have a fair bit of passion behind you and obviously a fair bit of knowledge, a heck of a lot more than I do. And I started having brief discussion with you about the fact that I've been reusing my yeast.
Yep.
And as of now, I am on my 12th batch of beer that has been brewed from one packet of yeast. Now, I won't name the yeast, but it's a very clean tasting yeast. It's very forgiving. Obviously, you can go down as low as 18, 19 degrees Celsius. You can even go up to 30 without producing any sort of off estuary flavours and things like that. But, obviously estuary flavours can be of benefit depending on the style you're going for. But, so, and you said something very interesting, because at the moment I'm not washing my yeast. I'm just collecting the trub in a sanitised, controlled environment. Putting them in, obviously, small little mason jars, and keeping them in the fridge, and then I'm dumping them in my batch. And because I'm up to 12 now, I think I mentioned something to you about, how long do you think you could use, yeast for? And you said something very interesting, and that's the thing, that's what I want to get at, because a lot of people in the community now are really starting to explore this experiment of reusing their yeast, because they're saving money and they're producing very good beer without having any issues at this point in time. And 12 batches is pretty good from one packet of yeast. But if you could maybe let us know a little bit about your experience, what you know about reusing yeast, maybe some of the science behind it, if you've got the time, because you know a heck of a lot more than I do. That would be really interesting for the viewers to just get a handle of.
Yeah, well, first of all, kudos to you for going 12 Gen. That just shows how much you understand and appreciate the cleanliness and the hygiene required in brewing, and that's probably one of the main, building blocks, foundations of brewing. So fantastic effort.
Cheers.
Basically, the interesting thing about yeast is you have a mother cell, obviously, and the mother cell buds and produces a daughter cell. So this happens basically during fermentation, and what happens is when the mother cell produces the daughter cell gets a scar on the cell wall where the daughter cell pops off, for want of a better word. I'm sorry for being scientific. But the daughter cell doesn't have a scar. So in theory, the actual age of your yeast slurry, if everything's done beautifully, will never change. The weighted average will always be exactly the same. So you can go on forever and a day, because as that mother cell buds again and again and again, she's going to get more scars on her cell wall, which affects how she brings sugars into the cellular membrane, and that affects how she ferments, which means she was going to flocculate out first. So when you're doing your yeast harvest, and taking, for example, dropping the first third, getting the second third, dropping the last third, for want of a better sort of ratio, you're always going to drop out those older ones first and get those nice, juicy young daughter cells in the middle. So if I go back to when I started at Lion Nathan, we were doing 12 generations as standard. And I suppose the caveat is always, if the yeast is infected, then don't use it. But if you've got no choice, then you can wash it in an acid solution, which does kill any bacteria present. But if it's not infected, you don't need to wash it. So this comes back also to your yeast husbandry effects, that you must have a very clean process.
Yeah.
So what happened at Lion was that we went from 12 to 10, and Lion still run at 10 to this day, and then you start again. So that's just an industrial standard, I suppose, for, what are they, the biggest brewer in Australia?
Yeah.
But for the home brewer, I would thoroughly encourage them to play around, because you can get some fantastic results and also save money. And at the end of the day, beer's about economics, just like anything. So you can cut your costs, you can cut your inputs. That's always a good thing.
Yeah. Yeah, that blew me away. I mean, look, at the end of the day, I guess, a theory is just a theory until you put it into practice and actually, have that empirical sort of data yourself and actually see it yourself. And it's one thing for someone to say that you can reuse yeast for a long time, but then when you start doing it yourself as a amateur brewer or whatever brewer you may be, it's really quite exciting. Who would have thought I would have got, excited over a little bit of slurry? But, at the end of the day, I'm brewing beer, and it can be simple beer, it can be a very hoppy beer, it might be mini mashes, it might be whatever it is. But to think that I've done 12 batches from one packet of dry yeast is pretty exciting, and says a lot about the yeast itself and how robust those little tiny creatures are.
And basically all we're doing, we give ourselves a fancy name called a brewer, but all we're actually doing is feeding yeast. Without yeast, we don't have anything.
Yeah, so that's right.
We need to make sure that they're as happy as they can be, because if they're not happy, then, they don't produce good beer.
Yeah, that's right. And so in layman's terms, you're basically saying, I hope you don't mind if I paraphrase or if I, do a little bit of a creative edit, but for home brewers, if they have their sanitisation down pat and the yeast is healthy, and obviously let's not forget you need to feed the yeast quality ingredients, so you wouldn't want to be putting too much dextrose into a batch of beer because that's a super refined sugar which the yeast will always maybe choose to eat first, but it might get a little bit tired. Is that fair to say, or?
Yeah, that's a really good point. So we're all malt here.
Yeah.
So the problem with sugar is that it takes a little bit of effort for yeast to ferment sucrose.
Yeah.
Excuse me, because sucrose is not a natural byproduct of mashing in. You got maltose, maltotriose, and glucose, not sucrose. And sucrose is slightly different. Also, when you're using straight sugar, there's no free amount of nitrogen coming through from the malt, and the yeast do need that as a yeast nutrient. So you're actually diluting the nutrient pool when you add sugar.
Yeah.
So that's one little thing to look out for. And there's ways around. You can add a little bit of yeast nutrient back in, which is not expensive.
No.
But you just need to check the dilution. You don't want to overdose on zinc because that can be detrimental to the yeast health.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, one of the things, I won't go into a full talk about it, but I cut my teeth with brewing on making mead, and I was only using local, unpasteurized, sort of raw honey, and I recently did a large batch of just semi-sweet local mead as well. And one of the things, obviously, I've discovered is that honey. Oh, sorry, there's my dog there. Yeah, calm down, mate. Shh, good boy. One of the things I found is that honey's a fantastic fermentable. I mean, the yeast love honey. The only problem is, though, honey actually has very little nutrients in there for the yeast. So I obviously used a process which I'm sure you're familiar with called staggered nutrient addition, and it was basically you're giving the yeast that little bit of extra nutrients that it needs throughout its life cycle. So I think it was every day I was aerating, and every second day I was aerating with yeast nutrient, and it actually, it's quite amazing. I don't know if you've done mead before, but one of the misconceptions with mead, and I've experienced this firsthand, is that people say, well, you've got to make it like they used to do in the old days, and you've got to age it for 3-5 years before you can have your first sip. But that was based on the fact that they were just throwing yeast in there. It was creating these off flavors. It was a very hot, alcohol-driven beverage, and you needed to mellow it. You needed to mellow it in order to even have your first sip. But the thing with yeast nutrient addition is that if you give the yeast what it needs, and it's healthy and it's happy at the end of the day, you actually get like a 3-year-old tasting mead in as little as a month. And I've done that experiment myself, and it was quite exciting to do that myself and realise that it's all about the yeast. I mean, if the yeast don't have the nutrients they need, just give them a little bit of extra food, care for them, give them the right temperature, give them the right food, and they'll always look after you. And they didn't produce any off flavours because they were in a happy environment. They weren't stressed, they weren't tired, and all that kind of stuff. So it's just a very interesting subject, especially as a brewer. And you mentioned it yourself as well, saving money, and that's a big thing, especially when you're not able to buy these ingredients in bulk. You're literally just doing it in your backyard, in your shed, or in your fermentation chamber, or whatever it is your setup may be. But Yeah.
Well, at the end of the day, you know, what separates brewing from winemaking is that brewing is about cash flow. And when you're talking on big brewery scale, that's even more so. So we turn over beer, and the quicker we can turn over beer, the better it is for the business.
Yeah.
And that's why brewing has always relied on science to help brewers understand what was going on. You know, brewers were very keen to spend time and money developing the microscope so we could really understand what this yeast thing was and what it was doing, how it can help us produce a better product. Same with, you know, refrigeration, fractometers, hydrometers, thermometers, all those things that brewing has grabbed when they've been developed by science, is saying we can use these to improve our process, understand it, and that's the basis of science, to try and understand it, reproduce it, and improve it. So you, by doing that mead experiment, just shows, you know, the myth and innuendo that goes around with a lot of craft industries can get you so far. But when you apply a little bit of science, you go, hey, we can change this, we can make it different, and that's the exciting thing.
Yeah, it's amazing, and it was truly something which I'll never forget. You know, just the experience, and I will be replicating that as well now that I know what the outcome can be firsthand. So correct me if I'm wrong. If I can just really put this down in layman's terms, for those guys out there that are listening, so all you subscribers out there, the amazing 17 Brew Crew community and other forums like that. Is it safe to say that at whatever setup you've got, if your sanitisation is down pat, with regards to collecting your slurry, washing your yeast, whatever it is, whatever method you may use for harvesting your yeast, if you're using quality ingredients, the yeast are happy, they're not infected, and your sanitisation's down pat, you could potentially reuse your yeast for how long?
100, 200.
200.
Indefinite.
Because of as you said before, because of the life cycle process, because of how they do their thing, you've actually got new yeast cells ready to go in that slurry mixture. Is that correct?
Yeah, correct. And in effect, the process is really harvesting. So you are getting, in your slurry, you'll have daughter cells with no scars, you'll have daughter cells with one or two scars, I should say mother cells then, etc., all the way through. And everything in nature falls into a national distribution curve. And that's the beautiful thing about nature. Yeah. So if you're doing everything as good as you can, yeah, there's no reason why you cannot continue forever and a day.
Wow. See, that's just exciting. It's wow, and there is, you know, I guess one of the questions one of the things which gets thrown around in the community, and I've said it before in my videos as well. Obviously, I'm mainly producing beer for myself. Sometimes if I increase my batch size, I might bottle a few beers, specialty beers, whatever, and I might send them to some mates around Australia, just so we can share a beer with each other and try each other's creations. But most of the time, I'm producing for myself. I think one of the things which people say, yeah, I love harvesting my yeast, but maybe if I was entering in a competition, I might want to start from scratch instead of using harvested yeast. Me personally, I've produced, and I said this in a video, I've produced like a poor man's easy as Pilsner. I've done amber ales. I've done really hoppy amber ales. I've done, you know, straightforward pale ales, really hoppy pale ales, like, you know, like really light sort of tasting beers, and a bunch of others, just using that same slurry. And it's never imparted any off flavours. It's never had a transfer of flavour from one batch to another, because obviously it's so minimal that it wouldn't be able to really impart any flavour, like even the little hop particulates that might be in the slurry. I mean, to a 20-litre batch, that's not going to add any flavour.
No.
So what would you say, I guess, for those that maybe they're collecting their slurry but they want to enter a competition? Do you think it might be worth their while starting from scratch, just so there's there's less risk? Or
I would say if you're entering a competition, then don't change anything. Do as you would normally do. The the pros of adding new yeast is that, you're 101% sure that it's clean. The cons are there's always a slight lag when starting with fresh yeast. Is it deceivable? That's debatable, depending on the beer style in particular.
Yeah.
And then that will come down more to the ingredients you use and how you present the yeast to the wort, etc. So I would say whatever you are most comfortable with in your day-to-day process. So if you're using fresh yeast all the time, use fresh yeast all the time. If you're using 4th generation, 5th generation, and, the beers from 5 are fantastic, then go again. There's no reason why, if you're using the same process, 6 shouldn't be any different to 5.
Yeah. I think that's a great statement. But I guess, every brewer, there's no two brewers created equal in the sense, they might have the same basic science behind them, but everyone's got their own little process, and if they would want to start from scratch, then so be it, if they want to lessen that risk or whatever it is. But yeah, I've got no issues with using my slurry mixture. I harvest it really fast, so there's less chance of infection. Sanitization's down pat. I've never had an issue, so it's really quite exciting. So you were at university for studying, I guess, brewing techniques or stuff for 4 years. You mentioned something to me when I spoke to you down at the brewery there, that what you spent most of your time studying, and it was a particular style of yeast. Was that correct?
Yeah, for one whole year. So 3rd year I just brewed wheat beer. And just pulled it apart and tried to understand what drives that characteristic style in wheat beer and how to control it and how to manipulate it. So that was a lot of fun, using all the resources that you have at a university to understand the compounds being released and how they've been converted. So that was a really cool project, and I suppose that's why our wheat beer has won 3 trophies so far. So.
Yes, and it was a fantastic wheat beer, by the way. That was that the? I'm just trying to think. Was that the one that had the clove flavour in it?
Yeah, clove and banana. So
yeah, yeah.
I suppose if I take a step back, when people come to our cellar door and they try our beers, most of our beers are malt driven, which is sort of the way I was taught, more the German way of brewing. So more malt and yeast and manipulation. And then you get to the wheat beer, which is a yeast-driven beer. And it's all about how that yeast strain converts a few compounds that are released from the malt during the mashing process.
Yeah.
And produce that clove aroma, but also the isoenol acetate, the big banana ester being produced as well. So that's really interesting to go through the tasting and go, okay, this is a yeast-driven beer, this is a malt-driven beer, this is a malt-driven beer.
Yeah. I think one of the things I love, I've made some Belgian ales using some brands that Mangrove Jacks have created over the years, and one of the things which I find amazing, but didn't really appreciate until I tried your wheat beer as well, was that you can have a beer that really, really tastes like there's actual clove, bananas, or there's some other flavour-driven adjuncts that have been thrown into the recipe, but yet it's all completely driven by the yeast. And I find that really amazing that we can actually get very specific flavours that will almost trick, well, I don't know about trick, but your palate will automatically assume that there's banana and there's clove in there, but having that just driven, the flavour driven by the yeast is actually quite amazing that you can get that really, interesting flavour come through in the beer.
Oh, yeah, without a doubt. And I think that's what makes wheat beer a very polarising beer as well, that people just aren't used to that big clove and banana and go, what the hell? Because the clove is a very subjective compound, and a lot of people don't like clove for whatever reason.
Yeah.
And the actual compound is very similar to another substance that people describe as mouthwash, disinfectant.
Okay.
So if you don't like that aroma, you go, oh, that's like disinfectant or mouthwash, which I haven't met so many people actually love mouthwash. So.
Yeah. Oh, wow. So,
or some people go the smoky bacon, Metwursky, very similar compound structures, just slightly different tails.
Wow.
And that sort of comes back to, no one's ever wrong in whatever their taste may be.
Yeah.
It's their taste after all, so you can't argue with someone's personal preference.
Yeah, definitely. Are you, I mean, one of the things, I just thought I'll throw this out there because it's something which I've been quite, I don't know about gung-ho about, but, there are some people that when you're brewing beer, they can be a little bit, what's the word I'm thinking of? I don't want to call them beer snobs, but there's people out there which sort of say, well, no, if you're going to brew this beer, you have to do it by this style guideline. You've got to do this, you've got to do that. And it has to fall into this sort of category. It has to have this many IBUs. But I guess one of the things, some of the best beers, and there are a lot of my mates out there which can tell their own stories about this as well. Some of the best beers I've ever made never fit or have never fit into a style guideline. And one of the things which I've said before, and I'm pretty confident that this is correct. I mean, every beer style that exists today must have all started out as an experiment or an accident anyway. So, I mean, it's kind of like, you don't say, like, do you know what I mean? Like, I think some people, when they get too finicky about, too specific about their beers, I mean, you've got to be careful when you transfer that onto someone else and say, well, you've got to be careful, you've got to do it like this, you've got to do it like that. Because I think some of the best results that I've had are experiments,
Oh, without a doubt, and like styles are morphing all the time.
Yeah. So
if you go back 30 years, probably you don't even have to go back 30 years, there's no such thing as an American Pale Ale.
Yeah.
So styles morph, and basically they've been morphing forever and a day. They would have morphed because education wasn't that great, during the 16th century. Not many people could write, so recipes changed from generation to generation because they just couldn't repeat what was done because they couldn't understand or read or write the process.
Yeah.
And that changes from town to town. That's one reason why you got Bock beers in Germany now, because in one region they produced a higher alcohol beer as their preference, and the other towns surrounding it got a liking to it.
Yeah.
So, well, without a doubt, things are always morphing, and nothing's ever set in stone. Nothing should ever be set in stone.
Yeah.
If we don't change, you look at nature. If you don't change, you die.
Yeah. Yeah, that's right. You've got to adapt, and to your environments. And I think with beers, it's even with home brewing. I mean, gosh, you'd have like 10 different home brewers making their sort of house pale ale, whatever that may be, and that's going to taste different. For every single person because of their personal preferences and what they like. And I guess that's the same commercially. I mean, yes, I know that some brewers, commercial brewers, may try and replicate other flavours from, say, other breweries because it's popular or whatever, but I think what can separate a really decent brewer from another is to really inject themselves into the beers that they're making, not be afraid, really put some personality into that, put some flavour, do what you want to do. And even if it doesn't fit into a style guideline, of what a pale ale should be, or that's just an example, slap pale ale on there on the label, or just call it something completely different, have a little bit of fun. But I think that's one of the things that I do. I make beers and then I create my own name for it. Just have fun with it. Make a label, put a fancy name on there, something really fun or funny, and then share the love. And then you've just maybe you've created a brand new style in and of itself, And it's just, it's fun. It's fun, and you can come up with some really great stuff at the end of the day. So, all right.
Well, and through that process, you're actually putting your heart and soul into the process, and that more or less, more often than not, flows through into the product. So there's nothing worse than tasting whatever bacon, wine, beer that just has no soul, has no, really? Well, what's that all? It's a liquid.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
That's one great way of, the passion flowing through into the product.
Yeah, definitely. So why don't you maybe just, let the guys out there and gals know where you are, and maybe just sort of like the opening times and things like that?
Yeah, so we're down here, Sand Road, McLaren Vale, so sort of in between McLaren Vale and McLaren Flat. The brewery's here. It's open 7 days a week from 11 to 5:30, basically. We've got a beautiful outdoor sitting area, which probably won't be too beautiful today when it's going to be 42. But on the weekend, it's going to be lovely. So here we've got 7 beers at the moment. Our small batch beer is still the raspberry wheat beer for the time being before our American wheat beer comes through, and we're doing a hip hop block. There you go, make up a new beer style. So people can come down, taste the beers, or they can come down and have a few beers, get out, enjoy the gum trees. We had a possum here last night.
Nice.
Kangaroos, koalas, whatever, and just enjoy the process. The brewery's there to be seen.
Yeah.
So we've got nothing to hide. Why would you hide stuff when you got beautiful equipment like that?
Definitely. Oh, and by the way, not that we'll get into a huge discussion about, international bittering units and how to balance them with malt and all that, but
that's a whole different category. That's a whole different state.
But I did get to enjoy your, I think it was a red ale, and that was 80. I think it was 80 IBUs. But you did mention something which obviously I've experienced before, is that just calling it 80 IBUs, might sound like it's really, really high, but depending on the quality of the ingredients and the malt you've got and how that balances out, it can really kind of mellow out that experience you get with the bitterness. And I just want to say that beer, even though, yes, it was a bitter beer, but it wasn't bitter that I had to, spit it out. It was absolutely gorgeous because the flavours you had were so layered and the hops were just so gorgeous. It was a really great experience, and I got to experience that outside, sitting under little hops that were growing up over my head, and it was just a really beautiful experience. So you guys out there, if you're visiting South Australia, or if you ever do choose to, please go down and visit Jeff and his lovely family. They're a great bunch of people, great business, great beers, and at the end of the day, he's got some great passion. And as he said before, if you've got that passion and you've got that respect for the products that you're using, it really does flow through to the products that you produce, and Jeff definitely has that in spades. So guys, get down there, try some of those beers, support, local, and keep it easy as. So Jeff, I want to say thank you so much for giving us your time.
My pleasure.
You're an absolute wealth of knowledge, and if I ever need any more information, I won't hesitate to give you a ring. So
no worries. I'll try and answer the phone call first time.
Yeah. All good, mate. All right, look, blessings to you and your family. Take it easy, and we'll see you around sometime.
Have a good day, everybody.
Cheers, mate.
Yeah.
Bye.